Are there things that we can tell ourselves that seem kind of trivial but actually have a lasting and powerful impact on our lives? I believe so, and I've got a story to share with you to illustrate this point. So, if you're on board with finding out how just simple little things that we tell ourselves can have a tremendous impact on the way that we live, the way that our bodies actually work, the nature of our relationships, and other stuff, come on with me. We're going to dig into the soil of this together. Welcome to you, my friend. My name is D. Grant Smith. I am the growth farmer for personal development through the lens of spirituality and storytelling. And I want to share a little personal story with you about something that I have been reflecting on a little bit and also realizing and living in the fruit of this entire thing. When I was 14 years old, I was hanging out with my buddy John. And John and I would ride our skateboards to areas of Houston, and he was much better at skateboarding than I was. I could kind of stay on a little bit and do this one sort of little flippy trick. I don't even remember what it was called, but John could do just about everything. Anyways, we had just gotten back from riding around all over Houston, and he told me about how earlier in the week, I think this was on like a Saturday, and this was in the summertime. Earlier in the week, he had started to feel a little sore throat. And I think maybe at the time strep throat or something was going around, and I was like, "Oh yeah, man, I really hope that I don't get sick." And he goes, "Well, tell you what, dude, I'm not gonna get sick." And I was like, "How are you gonna pull that off? You just, gonna down a bunch of maximum strength Robitussin or something like that?" And he goes, "No, dude, here's what I'm doing. I've been doing this for the past several weeks, and it totally works." He's like, "As soon as I start feeling the slightest little twinge in my throat, I just tell myself, I'm not getting sick, I'm not getting sick, I'm not getting sick. And a couple of days later, I feel perfectly fine without taking any medicine, without going to the doctor, without anything." And I was like, "Really? You just tell yourself you're not going to get sick?" And he goes, "Yeah, man, and it totally works." Now, I'm 14 years old. So that was 27 years ago. And if I do the math, we're talking about roughly 1996. I had no idea what affirmations were, what spirituality was really. I did not have any understanding about conscious creation, none of that stuff. But I had this experience. And upon reflection, I recognized that in a way, my divine self was going, "I'm going to give you some first tastes of what it means to actually tell yourself a story and the impact of what happens when you repeat that story, and to see how the stories that we repeat to ourselves, even in these little bitty statements that we're making to ourselves, trying to convince ourselves of something that might or might not be true, really does matter and really does end up being something that we live out." And so I subsequently started taking on this practice that my friend John told me. And as soon as I would start to feel the slightest bit of sickness, I would tell myself a couple things. A, I'm not getting sick, and B, I am perfectly healthy and perfectly well. And I got to a place where I told myself this additional story, that I have the most badass, awesome immune system ever. I even started kind of personifying it in a bit. I would imagine that my immune system was this super team combination of the Justice League and the Avengers and Rambo and the A-Team and Mr. T and Bruce Lee and John Wick. Over the years, I added that part in there too. But like, I just speak to this imagined super team of badasses and say, "Okay, my throat's not feeling good right now, guys. Go take care of business." Well, here's what's happened in my life. I have not been to the doctor since I was 14, with only two exceptions. I had a issue with a ingrown toenail when I was 18 that I had to have toe surgery on. That really sucked. I couldn't really convince my mind to permanently heal that. That needed actual medical attention. And I went and got a flu shot in 2019 so I could go hang out with my niece who had just been born. They were really particular about you having to have a flu shot to be able to hold little baby, and so I went and did that. But that's the only time I've been to the doctor in 27 years. And I really believe that my health and my incredibly strong immune system, even though I have literally felt the oncoming symptoms of flu-like stuff or pneumonia. I felt this stuff, but it only hangs out for a couple days because I just continue to affirm and remind myself over and over again, my immune system is awesome. I am perfectly fine and healthy. So it's not to say that I don't have the symptoms. I get the symptoms, but they just stay symptoms. They don't turn into sickness. That's one example. There are other things that I recognize in my life that I have told myself over and over and over again that have shifted the way that I feel about myself, the way that I see myself, the way that I present myself, and the way that life reflects itself back to me. Even in difficult, painful experiences, I tell myself I am love. I am loved and I am good. And does it immediately make everything perfectly fine and peachy and sunshine and rainbows? No. But it keeps me out of going into a place that I used to spend a lot of time in. I used to spend a lot of time in fear and insecurity and doubt and worry. And I had a bunch of really terrible negative stories that I would repeat to myself all the time that would then get reflected back to me, because that's the way that life actually works. It's not other people that are causing us problems. It's our perception of situations and the meaning that we attach to that. And what ends up happening is the more we tell ourselves a negative story, the more that negative story ends up showing up and gets reflected back to us. So if we want to change anything in our lives, we need to become very conscious about what is the story that we're attaching to whatever situation or circumstance or issue or person or criteria or whatever it is. And start taking a really introspective, close look at what are those stories? And are those stories serving our highest good? Does this story that I'm telling myself, this pervasive thought over and over again against this particular person or about this particular person, is the way that I see their responses to me coming from a place of love, or is it coming from a place of rejection? Honestly, I used to tell myself all kinds of stories about different people, people that I truly loved and believed loved me, people that I didn't know very well at all, people that I didn't know at all. I used to tell myself a negative rejection story that I was really totally unconscious and not aware of. And it wasn't until I started practicing awareness and becoming more of the observer of my thoughts instead of immediately attaching on to whatever it was that was popping up into my head that I began to notice, oh, well, here's a story that isn't serving me. And I have repeated this story to myself innumerable times. No wonder it keeps showing up. We are responsible for the stuff we tell ourselves. And we are also responsible for the stories that we're living out. So I began this whole video by telling you a positive story about a way that I've kept my physical body healthy for a very long span of time and continue to do the same thing. And I'm also telling you another side of my personal journey in that I have become more and more aware of the fact that for a long time, the lens that I was looking at life through, even in my healing journey, even in my places of affirming that I am love, I was still telling myself a negative story that pertained to not being loved and being rejected. And as I've stepped back and zoomed out a little bit and began to observe myself and my thoughts more, I've begun to see the stories that were underlying all of this stuff. And so when we're changing the story that we're telling ourselves, we need to repeat these new stories over and over and over again. I made a video that I'm going to link up here recently about simple ways to transform our lives. And one of the most simple things we can do is repeat the new story that we want to experience. Because the old story got implanted in us by repetition, the new story has to be implanted by repetition as well. And another way that we can supercharge this process and clean and clear a whole bunch of stuff that isn't serving us is from another video that I recently made that I called a spiritual OxyClean. It's by practicing something called Ho'oponopono. I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. Just those 4 lines cleans and clears that old story and helps us replace it with something new. For a metaphysical, or maybe metaphysical certainly, but it's also a metaphoric picture of what this looks like so we can visually see how it works, I wrote this really cool story called The Truth That Keeps on Truthing. And in that story, the main character has a conversation with a group of college students that are really struggling with a lot of different issues. issues with their parents, issues with their job, issues with money, issues with relationships. And they're trying to figure out how to overcome this stuff and get out of all of these terrible places. And the main character, a guy named Joe, paints a picture for them, a simple meditative picture about imagining the stories they're telling themselves and how to erase the negative stories, rewrite new stories, and totally transform their lives through a visualization that totally changes the game. And I base this entire story off of my own personal practice of doing just this. Go get this story. It will change your life. It's called The Truth That Keeps on Truthing, and it's available under the Stories tab at growthfarming.com. All right, that's what I have to share with you for today. What do you think? Are you on board with changing the stories that you're telling yourself and changing them into a story that you can really align yourself with because you want to live out? And are you also on board with taking a step back a little bit and saying, okay, let me look at my thoughts instead of attaching onto them, and becoming more of the observer? Because in doing so, you will find that there's some stories that even though you're doing a lot of affirmations and you're really changing your self-concept and it's really awesome, there's still some underlying negative stuff that might be holding you back in ways that you didn't know. It's been a big revelation to me. I've been taking accountability for myself in changing this process, continuing to be the observer and not attach on to a story or a thought that I don't want to be a part of my reality. If you're on board with that too, drop down and let me know in the comments below. Awesome. I appreciate you. I love you, and I'll see you again soon.